Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez, and we are officially less than 100 days until the midterm elections. Right now, President Trump is in battleground Michigan, focusing on the most important midterm issue, the economy. It all comes as energy prices are riding a roller coaster of ups and downs from the war against Iran. Meanwhile, Democrats are grappling with headwinds of their own, including major divisions over the direction of their party and a cash crunch at the Democratic National Committee. Starting in Michigan, where President Trump lauded his administration's record on the economy, highlighting his tariff policy as a benefit for the auto industry, and saying that the next president will see the results. And this all comes as the president is significantly underwater on the economy and inflation in recent polling. The president has told reporters he is not concerned about the war's impact on the midterms, but he has repeatedly pledged that prices would fall once the war was over, last week asking voters to give him more time. And oil fell today on renewed hopes for diplomatic talks after the administration paused strikes. Prices at the pump remain elevated with no clear path to end the conflict as the war enters its fifth month. While the economic headwinds hit the president and his party, Democrats are facing something of a financial crisis of their own at party headquarters, facing a major cash crunch. The New York Times reporting Democratic Party leaders are asking vendors not to send bills until after the midterm elections, while Notice reports the Democratic National Committee put its Washington, D.C. headquarters up as collateral to obtain a loan last year. At the center of the storm, DNC Chair Ken Martin, who has struggled to rehabilitate his party's image after the 2024 election. Asked yesterday about Martin's leadership, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries expressed his confidence in the chairman during a campaign event with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro.
Can you comment on the report that the DNC is broke and that and wondering if the chairman of the DNC still has your full support?
Yes, the chairman has my full support. What we've seen over the last 18 plus months is that Democrats have won every single meaningful election up and down the ballot across the country during that period of time. And we look forward to our continued partnership.
This also comes as the party prepares for another bruising primary next week, highlighting the tensions between progressives and moderates as Congresswoman Haley Stevens takes on progressive Abdul El-Sayed in next week's Democratic Senate race in Michigan. Joining me now is NBC's chief White House correspondent, Garrett Haake. And with me here on set is national political reporter Ben Camisar. Thank you both so much for being here. Garrett, I want to start with you. The president's speaking right now in Michigan. How much is he staying focused on these economic issues?
Well, Gabe, it's always a bit of a sliding scale with President Trump, but I think the White House would be pleased with what they've seen from the president in these remarks in Michigan today. He has made weaves onto issues like Iran. He's talked about the beautification of cities like Washington, D.C., but he has also focused substantially on the One Big Beautiful Bill, as it was called, his no tax on tips policy. He's spoken about the auto industry, which is, of course, a big deal in Michigan, and he has just finished introducing, before I was walking out to the camera, the slate of Republicans who are running in some big contested races there for governor and for Senate in particular, giving the picture that I think all of those folks want as they try to recapture his 2024 magic. So with President Trump, it's always a little bit of everything, but the economic message is, at least to some degree, coming through.
You know, earlier today on his way to Michigan on Air Force One, he also spoke again about the Save America Act. He's been pushing for that, as you know, and he's been pushing the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, and Senate Republicans to really pass that. Of course, Thune has repeatedly said that he doesn't have the votes. What's the president's frustration level right now with Thune?
Well, his frustration level in general is high when it comes to the Save America Act. He's been talking about it, bringing it up at every opportunity for months now. But whether his frustration is specifically with John Thune or not, it's a little bit difficult to say. Publicly, the president has insisted this is not about replacing John Thune. And you hear from Republican senators all the time that they feel like Thune has done a pretty good job of figuring out how to communicate directly with Trump without raising his ire on issues like this. But nevertheless, it is Thune who's sort of in the crosshairs as the decision maker in the Senate. But I think the president knows and is certainly being told by his staff that John Thune cannot make votes appear where they don't otherwise exist. Now, Thune could make this painful for Republican senators and insist that they do what the president has asked and stay here in Washington through August, not passing the SAVE Act. But that's highly unlikely to change any Republicans' minds on the act itself or on getting rid of the filibuster, which this is ultimately about.
And Garrett, is there any concern among Republicans that he's focusing on this bill at the expense of other issues that could actually help the party overcome these political headwinds we've been talking about ahead of the midterms?
Yeah, definitely. I will say you hear that more so from some of these Republicans who will not be coming back in the next Congress, folks like Bill Cassidy or John Cornyn, who've already lost their primaries. They view these bills as somewhat backward looking. You know, that while they have publicly all said that they think some of the priorities in here, like higher voter ID requirements and so forth, are legitimate and good things for Republicans to be focusing on, that this bill itself, without the votes to advance it, is just talking about something that can't be done.
Garrett Haake, live for us at the White House. Garrett, thank you. I want to turn now to Ben. And let's turn now to the Democrats' turmoil. How big a deal are these money issues, and what might they mean for cash-strapped Democrats and candidates in key races like Maine?
Yeah, it's the $1 billion question, right? And there's not an easy answer. On one hand, yes, the Democrats have been massively outraised and outspent by their Republican counterparts. Particularly, it's the spending piece, right? You know, it's obvious that their party in power always raises more, but for Republicans to be sitting on a $100+ million nest egg and for Democrats to be in debt, that's a kind of comparison that is just very bad, not just for the, you know, for the story and for the rhetoric, but it's also just, that is money that can be used to help win races, right? There's this new Supreme Court case, which I won't sort of bore you all with, but basically it makes that money more powerful. And so, yes, that's a problem, but also the flip side is Democrats are pointing to a lot of the operatics and a lot of the president's polling numbers, and they think and they hope that that's kind of operatics and sort of mood of the midterms is going to help them.
And what does this all mean for the DNC chair, Ken Martin? We just heard right there Hakeem Jeffries sticking by him. But are other rank-and-file Democrats really growing more frustrated here?
You're seeing some cracks, but not a flood. And ultimately, I think there's kind of two things here, right? First off, the DNC is a membership-driven organization. We like to think about these party organizations as being the head of the party. They're also just sort of the president of this small group of membership, right? And so far, there hasn't been a public exodus of the members. And hopefully in Ken Martin's mind, hopefully he thinks that he can get through the midterms and then ultimately push on to 2028. The question will be what happens at that pivot point. Will the party be happy enough to let him continue?
Well, looking ahead to 2028, this all comes after Friday. The Party Rules Committee recommended that the 2028 primary order start with South Carolina for Democrats. Now, some progressives are saying that this is all meant to stop their momentum. What do you make of that argument?
I make that we've really not moved on past the 2016 election, right? Like the progressives have not really fixed their relationship with the DNC ever since the 2016 primary, where they felt like the party was putting their thumb on the scale against them. Everything that's happened in the Democratic Party since kind of points to that. I think that debate is still part of that argument, but I think being in the room, the debate was among the membership was not about progressive. It was not about establishment. It was strictly about which state, what the order here. And frankly, the big lean on South Carolina, Democrats really pointed to in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act, in the wake of redistricting that's going to carve up a lot of these black majority seats. And that was far more weighing on these members' minds than any sort of progressive fight.
Well, South Carolina versus Nevada, black voters versus Latinos, really the party trying to figure out what its identity is for years to come. Ben Cameron, thank you so much. I want to turn now to Jaime Harrison, former chair of the Democratic National Committee. Mr. Harrison, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to start with the troubles facing the DNC at the moment, as we were just discussing with Ben. As former chair of the party, is this a leadership issue or an environment issue?
Well, listen, I think every chair inherits a different set of circumstances. So, I was fortunate to begin with a Democratic president in the White House. Ken is leading during a very different different political environment, right? I was in the DNC in 2018 when Tom Perez, in a very similar fashion, inherited a DNC after coming after a presidential election loss. I mean, when you even take a look at the cash on hand, we didn't have a whole lot of money in 2018 at the DNC. I think if you compare where we were in 2018 on cash in hand, where the DNC is now, I think we had in 2018 $9 million. I think the DNC has 16 million. We were in 2018 $6 million in debt. I think this DNC is about 18 million. So all in all, it was around the same space. But I want people to remember, and this is why it's important to understand the history behind all of this stuff. We still won 41 seats in the House of Representatives in 2018. Right? So the House is not on fire. This is what happens coming off of a presidential election loss. So you got to continue to cultivate those grassroots donors. You got to go to those major donors, and they will come back as we get closer to the election. But you really, really have to focus on the energy right now. And that is the energy's with us in terms of winning these races in special elections.
Well, I think some of the concern, though, among Democrats now is, not just your cash on hand, but also the fact that Republicans have been very strong fundraising numbers at this point. And as we were just talking about with Ben, he just walked us through the cash issues that the DNC is facing, that cash crunch. Are you concerned about what this will eventually mean for the party's chances of retaking the House or Senate?
No, I'm not. When you take a look at our individual candidates, they're doing better than their Republican counterparts, the people who they're running against in terms of raising money. The DS and the DSCC and the DCCC are on par with their counterparts there. But and in the end, yes, Donald Trump is sitting on $400 million. But do we actually think Donald Trump is going to spend that on anybody other than Donald Trump? The history tells us that he won't. And so it's really, really important for us to continue to support our candidates as much as we possibly can. Send your contributions in to your candidates of choice, right, but also make sure that you understand that we are really focusing on sending resources to our parties in the state parties so that they can compete as well.
Why do you think that is, though? Why do you think candidates are doing so well fundraising on their own instead of the DNC?
Because, again, I think the DNC is one of those, it's the carte blanche. You go online right now and, people will blame the DNC for everything. If the sky is gray, they say, well, it's the DNC that caused the sky to be gray, right? And so therefore that sometimes that reflects on these national committees. And it's not unique to the DNC. When the RNC is out of power, out of the White House, it's the same type of thing. It's just that these major committees really absorb all of the negativity out there about being outside of power, while the candidates provide a fresh face, a fresh choice. And that's where people want to send their dollars.
Well, the DNC Rules Committee also on Friday, as we mentioned, recommended that the order for the 2028 presidential primaries, starting with South Carolina, then Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Michigan, and Virginia, all before Super Tuesday. Now, of course, I know you're happy to see South Carolina first, but what message do you think the larger batch of states sends about the party's priorities here?
Well, I'm very, very pleased by this calendar, and I think it reflects the diversity of this party, and it looks like the modern-day Democratic Party. And I think putting South Carolina first means that candidates begin by talking to communities that too often are asked to wait until later on, particularly black voters. Black voters don't simply deserve to ratify a nominee after the field has narrowed, and that's the role that South Carolina has played historically. But they now deserve to help shape the field from day one, to make sure that the issues that are really important for them and their communities are ones that are being discussed at the very beginning of this presidential process. And Nevada is also going to play that role as the number two as well. When you see in the past, Iowa and New Hampshire have had an outsized influence, and now you have two states that are very diverse that will play that role at least in this 2028 election cycle.
And you've said that South Carolina first works because its Democratic base is not conservative or progressive, but that they're pragmatic. What do you say to progressives who say that the state's moderate sensibilities are exactly why it should not be first, and that it's meant to blunt progressive momentum within the party?
Well, the example that the progressives then give you is Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders didn't lose in South Carolina because he was progressive. Bernie Sanders lost in South Carolina because he didn't put the grassroots operation on the ground to build a type of operation to convince people to support him. Remember, this is the state of Jesse Jackson. 1988, Jesse Jackson and that progressive platform that he had. And guess what? He won South Carolina. Right. So if you want to win South Carolina, you can't use this state as a flyover state. You only come in for a few days and then you think that's all you need to do. You got to build the operation, just like you would go to Iowa and New Hampshire and rub elbows and go to the state fairs and go to. Well, now you got to go to the HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. You got to go to the churches. You got to go to the barbershops. You got to go to the VFWs. You have to make sure that you build a grassroots operation. So I say to progressives, moderates, and conservatives, come and build an operation in South Carolina and make your case to these voters, because they are pragmatic. If they see that and they can sniff out BS, if you are not going to if they don't believe that you are going to fight for them and their families and their communities, then they're not going to support you.
Mr. Harrison, last month you posted on X, quote, "I say this with no ill will or animosity. If you hate the Democratic Party, then please don't run for our nomination." Were you referencing specific candidates with that post?
Well, I was, I know a lot of people like to make it out. I've been saying that now for months. I said it back in August or September of last year, that I see more and more that people are getting a lot of political credibility out on the Twitter streets by dogging out the Democratic Party, throwing mud on the Democratic Party. And I don't care if you're progressive, I don't care if you're moderate or conservative. I think it's important. If you want this party to be strong to fight back against fascism, then you can't try to demonize and destroy the party in the process in order to just get a little cachet.
Well, you also posted that on the night that several Mamdani-backed candidates did well in New York. Are you saying that had nothing to do with that?
I actually posted that prior to we even knowing who won those elections that night. There's a lot of things that I'm paying a close attention to. I know, like, a lot of folks in New York think that New York is the center of the world, but it ain't the center of my world. So a nice place to visit.
Nothing to do with Mamdani, you're saying?
No, I mean, and I praise Mayor Mamdani, and I think he's doing a really good job. And listen, I don't think he's one of those people who is trying to destroy the party or trying to throw mud on the party, right? I think reading comprehension is really, really important here. If you are not hating on the Democratic Party, if you're not trying to destroy the Democratic Party, then what I said does not apply to you.
Jaime Harrison, former DNC chair, thank you so much for your time here on Meet the Press Now. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And coming up, President Trump pauses strikes against Iran after 13 straight days of attacks. Is diplomacy driving his decision or something else? We've got the view from Washington and the region. Plus, manhunt in Seattle. A toddler is still in the hospital after a deadly shootout at a food festival. What do we know about the suspect in custody and the person police are still searching for? You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. And welcome back. After 13 consecutive days of U.S. strikes on Iran, the Trump administration appears to be pausing further military escalation against Tehran, at least for now. On Friday, the president said the military was, quote, locked and loaded. But since then, there have been no known U.S. strikes. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, telling Kristen Welker on Meet the Press yesterday that the president is making room for diplomacy.
What the president is doing right now, as we've seen all along, is giving some talks, some space. Talks are ongoing. They're happening at every level, from the more technical aspect of it all the way to the highest levels, of course, within both the Iranian government and the U.S. government. The president has all options on the table, and he is exercising both diplomatic, economic, and military to achieve a very clear strategic aim.
The president today appearing optimistic about the status of those talks with Iran.
They want to meet, and we're meeting. We'll see what happens. There's a chance we can make a deal. They would not have requested the meeting if we were doing poorly. The only reason they want to meet is because we've been hitting them very hard. Yeah.
How much patience do you have left?
I have a lot of patience. I have plenty of time. Plenty of time. You know, we're having good talks. So we'll see what happens. I think there's a good chance that something could happen. And if it does, good. If it doesn't, we go back to doing what we were doing 2 days ago.
As we mentioned, oil prices are falling at the prospect of diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran. Gas prices, meanwhile, are holding steady at $4.11 a gallon. Joining me now is NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube here in the studio, and from the region, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Thank you so much for joining me, Courtney. I want to start with you. You have new reporting about Iran firing drones in the Strait of Hormuz. What can you tell us about that, and how quickly could the U.S. resume military operations if the president decides that this diplomacy path is not working out?
Yeah, so we learned from a U.S. official that, in fact, Iran has continued to fire drones at ships that are moving through the Strait of Hormuz, despite the fact that there has been this pause in operations. So the pause being the U.S. military hasn't taken strikes inside Iran. Iran hasn't lashed back out at U.S. allies and installations were housing Americans in the region since last week. So, but there is still activity there, and the U.S. military continues to shoot those drones down. And that, to your next question, is why they could restart immediately. If, in fact, President Trump were to decide he wants to either continue this day after day campaign of several hours of strikes, or if he wants to expand it out. One reality that the military is facing right now is those 13 consecutive nights did really degrade Iran's capabilities along that coastal area. So if they were to continue and they wanted to continue taking strikes every single day or even step up the campaign, they're going to have to expand out both geographically and even in their targeting.
They're running out of targets along the coast.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, what the drone firing proves that there still are things there that they can target, but they've degraded a lot of it.
You have also reported that the U.S. military has let some of the Iranian attacks go through their defenses, essentially on purpose. Is that because of the depleted stockpiles, or how big of a consideration is that right now?
It's factoring into this because it's these longer range defensive munitions that are really one of the concerns right now. So in air and missile defense in the military, you are generally trained that if there's a projectile, a missile that's going towards an empty body of water, it's not going to threaten anything. They will make the calculation to let it go rather than expend these very expensive munitions. What's different now that we're learning, though, is that in some cases they're allowing some of these projectiles like missiles to go through, even if they are going to cause damage to a base. Now, the officials we spoke with insisted that this has not led to that they are aware of any American injuries or deaths. And the reality is even an intercept can be dangerous to the people down below. Debris can fall once the intercepting missile hits the projectile. But this is in part due to the fact that the stockpiles are low. And because this really has no end in sight right now, they can't just be expending them if it's something that's going to hit maybe an empty building, even if it's going to do damage to it.
And Courtney, you've also been tracking how the U.S. military is categorizing the deaths of some of the soldiers in the Middle East. Walk us through that.
It's confusing, Gabe. So last week, on Wednesday, when the remains of those 4 soldiers who were killed the previous days by Iran, 3 in Jordan and 1 in Iraq, when they returned back to the U.S., the database that the Pentagon keeps for combat casualties listed 18 total deaths. Suddenly, the next day, it only listed 14 without any explanation. The Pentagon chalked this up to a data problem in their computer system, but never really explained exactly why it had happened. Well, then over the weekend, very quietly, the Pentagon added this new category, overseas operations, and all 4 of those soldiers ended up in that list. All that we know about that is that it's any kind of overseas operation that occurred since July 7th to now. But what's really notable in it that we noticed right away is that it also included 207 injured Americans, primarily Army, that have occurred since July 7th. And why that's so notable is the fact that the Pentagon's only acknowledged about 100 injuries in that same timeline.
All right, so Courtney Kube tracking the numbers here. And by the way, I should point out the president, he's referred to 18 deaths in Iran. So some confusion about the numbers there, right?
Absolutely. The president has said that they died fighting to ensure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon.
Courtney Kube, our senior national security correspondent. Courtney, thank you. I want to turn now to Richard in Israel. What is the mood like in the region now, Richard, now that the military appears to have paused these strikes, at least for now, but the war could still be widening in other respects, right?
Absolutely. Just to continue the excellent conversation you were just having with Courtney, who, as usual, has great detail. Just because these major strikes between the U.S. military and Iran, strikes on Iranian territory, Iran retaliating against major U.S. military installations in the Middle East, just because those have paused, it doesn't mean that the conflict has paused, because by now the conflict has so many different fronts. There is the ongoing conflict in the Strait of Hormuz. Just today, Iran, while it acknowledges that it is engaging in diplomacy and that it's describing some progress, Iran is continuing to insist that it has sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and should continue to have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. So that's a major sticking point. And it attacks ships when they use shipping lanes that Iran does not approve of or authorize. So that's ongoing. The Red Sea, further to the west, 12% of the world's trade passing through the Red Sea. That is still an active disputed area, sometimes a combat zone. Just today, Saudi Arabia said that it was hit by numerous militia groups, with both the Houthis in Yemen and an Iraqi militia group believed to have been responsible. The Ukrainians are also involved in the Caspian Sea, according to Iran, firing on an Iranian ship in the Caspian Sea. So there are many fronts to this war that are still by no means settled.
And Richard, Prime Minister Netanyahu says that he expects to meet with President Trump here in Washington tomorrow. What will you be watching for in that meeting?
Well, we'll see what kind of reaction he gets, because President Trump has often been criticized for being led into the Iran war by Prime Minister Netanyahu. The impression that many people have, and you can read this in editorials in Europe and in many places around the world, that Israel began this war, dragged President Trump into it, and that he is now sort of hostage to this conflict, as are the American people. So we'll see what kind of reception he receives, if he addresses that issue at all. I think it's also significant that Zelensky is in Ukraine, because the Ukrainian president Zelensky is also in Washington, because in some ways these two world leaders are competing for the United States' attention, that Ukraine wants military aid and Israel wants continued U.S. military support.
Busy day tomorrow here in Washington, also with a memorial service for Senator Lindsey Graham, who, of course, was very involved, very outspoken about both of those conflicts. Thank you. A lot to watch for. Richard Engel live for us in Jerusalem. Richard, thank you. And up next, health experts say the Cyclospora outbreak is still not fully under control as the number of cases rise, and officials try to nail down the source. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We're following breaking news out of Seattle, where a manhunt is underway for a second alleged shooter in an attack that killed 3 people and injured 4 others, including a toddler. The shots rang out just after 6 p.m. during a popular food festival in downtown Seattle near the Space Needle. Witnesses describing the chaos that followed.
I heard about, I'd say, close to 12. Sounded a little bit like firecrackers at first. It kept, took like, I'd say, a half a second pause, and I heard a lot more. I realized it was semi-automatic. Probably it sounded like a switch. I looked to my left. I saw at least one individual with a switch, semi-automatic. I saw another one that was 2. That's when I heard over that those shots fired. That's when I took off around the corner. I heard that I saw at least one person go down.
Well, I'm one of the vendors inside, and we suddenly heard some firecrackers, what I thought were firecrackers, and people started yelling, shooter, shooter. And there was like a stampede of people just running, knocking down a lot of products from the vendors, etc.
Police say one suspect, who's just 15 years old, surrendered after officers confronted him. A second alleged shooter remains on the loose, but police say they do not believe there is an outstanding threat to the community. NBC's Liz Kreutz joins me now from Seattle. And Liz, what do investigators know about the suspected gunman who's now in custody, and what are police saying about the second suspect who's still on the run?
Yeah, hey, Gabe. Well, officials have not released the identity of that 15-year-old, but they do say that that teenager was exchanging gunfire with that other person when the bullets went into the crowd, injuring several people, killing 3 people. We do know that that teenager is expected in court now any minute and faces really serious charges. Take a listen.
The Seattle Police Department detained a 15-year-old juvenile in connection with the shooting. The teen was booked into the Judge Patricia H. Clark Children and Family Justice Center for investigation for firearms violations and first-degree assault. We believe this teenager opened fire in the crowd, but details are still under investigation. We have not formally arrested anyone for investigation of homicide.
Now, as for that second gunman, it remains to be seen, according to the latest press conference we just had from the police chief, whether that person is actually still on the loose or potentially one of the victims. That is all still under investigation, Gabe.
And Liz, we know that 4 people, including a toddler, as we mentioned, were injured in the shooting. Any updates on their conditions?
Yeah, we know that actually, we just got an update that 5 people were injured. 4 of those people, the adults, have all been released from the hospital. But that toddler, that little boy, remains hospitalized right now and is in satisfactory condition. And I'll just tell you, Gabe, we're back here where this all happened. In fact, the shooting happened just down the road here. And we've been seeing the vendors returning today. And you just get a picture. I mean, come look over here. All this food just left here as people quickly in the chaos had to get out. We saw pancakes still on the grill. It was a really scary, chaotic scene for so many, Gabe.
Liz Kreutz live for us on the scene there in Seattle. Liz, thank you. And turning now to the nationwide cyclosporiasis outbreak, with concerns now spilling over into Capitol Hill. Congressman Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, is now demanding answers from the CEO of Taylor Farms about the company's role in that outbreak. The FDA says shredded iceberg lettuce sourced from Taylor Farms is the likely source of the spread, which has now expanded to 9 states, although the agency says none of the products it has tested have come back positive. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb now says that he believes the agency he once led does not have the outbreak under control.
I don't think it's under control yet, per se. I think that they've done a good job, FDA has, isolating this to central Mexico and some specific farms as well. And so by isolating it to that region, a lot of restaurants, a lot of wholesalers, retailers have been able to cut off supplies from central Mexico, and I think that mitigates the risk.
NBC News medical reporter Erica Edwards joins me now. Erica, thanks so much for joining us. Are officials any closer to finding the source of this outbreak now?
FDA officials are pretty confident that the source is linked to a Taylor Farms facility in Mexico. That's based largely on interviews with people who got sick. And we should mention that no samples of Taylor Farms lettuce have tested positive. So that leaves us with still a lot of questions. Dr. Gottlieb, who you mentioned there, who used to run the FDA, said the investigation should have been quicker, blaming the CDC on being slow and initially missing this outbreak. He also said that the FDA really has not been communicating to the public enough about staying safe and reducing risks. Gabe?
And Erica, once they do feel confident that they've found the source, again, we don't have that confidence yet, but how long will it take then to contain the outbreak or at least slow it down?
So right now, investigators are watching to see what kind of effect the Taylor Farms recall has on case counts. If they go down, maybe the recall worked enough to end the outbreak. As of today, however, Michigan's case count has jumped by more than 1,000 since late last week, now up to more than 9,000 in that state alone. Gabe, this is not over yet.
And Erica, let's turn now to another health concern, the rising number of measles cases in the U.S. The number of cases has already reached a 35-year high, and we're not even 7 months through 2026. Health officials say that more than 90% of the cases are in people who are not vaccinated. Now, how concerned are they about this trend, and what do they fear could be the long-term effects here?
You know, we've been reporting on measles heavily for more than a year, and doctors remain very concerned about the increase in cases. There's no sign that the administration is actively doing anything about it, at least publicly, doing the bare minimum to encourage vaccinations. There is a November meeting scheduled with the World Health Organization to determine whether the U.S. has officially lost its status of having eliminated measles. Health officials, however, point to ongoing outbreaks and say it's clear we have lost control, and they predict many more kids will get sick in the coming months. Gabe.
Our medical reporter, Erica Edwards. Erica, thank you. And after the break, the fight for Maine Senate begins again after Democrats nominate Troy Jackson to replace Graham Plattner to take on Republican Senator Susan Collins. Your panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, we are 99 days ahead of the November midterm elections with a key Senate race now officially set in Maine, where former state Senate President and progressive Troy Jackson clinching the Democratic nomination to replace Graham Plattner, and he will now face incumbent five-term Senator Susan Collins. Both candidates are reacting to that matchup.
30 years later, Susan Collins is still in Washington. So I do have one question. Who has she served? She has served Donald Trump.
I've always been struck by the fact that once he became in Senate leadership in Augusta, he adopted a hyper-partisan approach to issues and a very far-left approach. A very far-left ideology that really overlaps with the far-left agenda of Graham Plattner and of the Democratic Socialists of America.
And joining me now is our panel, NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, Taryn Rosenkranz, Democratic strategist and president and CEO of New Blue Interactive, and Mark Bednar, Republican strategist and former advisor to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Thank you all so much for joining me here on the panel. Sahil, I want to start with you. I also want to play a little bit more of what Susan Collins told you. You were in Maine this weekend. Let's listen to more of what she said.
I've worked with 5 presidents, and there's not a single one of them with whom I've agreed on every issue. There have been times when the president has tweeted that he very much disagrees with my votes. There are times when he has said in interviews that I'm a good person, and so I've been on the receiving end of both of his views.
That is quite the tightrope, is it not? How much does she need to distance herself while at the same time not upsetting the president?
Senator Collins has the toughest high wire act of any politician in the country in the 2026 election. She has to turn out strongly pro-Trump MAGA voters. Even in Maine, without them, there's no path to victory. She knows that. But she also has to maintain a strong appeal to moderates, to independents, to women who she won by 3 points in her last re-election in 2020, even though Joe Biden won them on the same ballot by 20 points. So that's the balance that she needs to strike. It's a uniquely difficult environment. The Republicans I've talked to say she's navigated Trump very well. She's broken with him certain times. One of them used the term been able to disagree with him without being disagreeable. She doesn't run to a camera and attack him when that happens. So there are 2 theories that I have in terms of how this could go for Susan Collins. The case for her winning is she's defied gravity before. She could do it again. The case for her losing is that she could essentially be the John Tester of this cycle. Tester also defied gravity again and again and again as a Democrat in a red state. Eventually, his luck ran out in a difficult environment. At some point, throughout between now and November, Troy Jackson's assignment is going to be to connect Susan Collins to Trump as much as possible, talk about all the times she's voted with him, more than 90% of the time. Susan Collins' assignment is going to be to distinguish herself as she was doing in that interview with me.
You know, and Mark, Troy Jackson holds progressive views, but he comes from a more or less traditional background, at least more traditional background. He's a lumberjack turned labor leader. Is this the candidate that Susan Collins wanted to run against?
I think she's comfortable either way. And to say that he has more of a traditional background than Graham Plattner, that's not that big of a revelation.
Yeah.
What is important, though, is he does harbor a lot of very far left views. So, for instance, he supports socialized medicine, or what he calls Medicare for all. Does that include encompassing illegal immigrants, as Bernie's plan does? If so, or if not, that's something that Republicans are going to have to prosecute against him. And thus far, we've seen for Republicans, they're making this comparison to Plattner. You see it on the airwaves a little bit. I don't know if that's necessarily the right approach. He has his own track record. He has some behavioral issues. I think Susan Collins, being who she is, making the case to Mainers of who she is against him, that's the recipe for success here.
And Taryn, Collins holds a massive financial advantage over Jackson. $11 million cash on hand, another $60 million in reserved airtime from outside groups. Jackson, though, he has pulled in over $2 million since securing a nomination. But how much of an uphill battle is this for him?
It's going to be an uphill battle just because this race has always been. Collins is a 5-term incumbent. This time, though, it may be the incumbent name attached to her that may be the problem. I think right now people are really frustrated with incumbents. It's a very anti-incumbent election. And I think if she's not talking about how she's going to make things better with the economy and at the pump and in the grocery store and all that good stuff, I think you're going to have a really hard time no matter how much you paint him as a socialist and an extremist. It may not work.
Okay, well, do you think Democrats have a realistic shot at flipping the seat?
I think that Democrats have a shot everywhere this particular cycle just because of what's happening in the world. And if Republicans continue to not talk about the things that matter to Americans, they're going to pay for it at the polls.
Okay, well, Saha, I want to turn now to Capitol Hill, where there's this growing feud, if you want to call it, this growing rift between the Senate Majority Leader John Thune and President Trump. The president posting online this morning that the Senate should not leave town until it passes the Save America Act or terminates the filibuster. Is any of that likely to happen?
Short answer, no. There's no indication that that's going to happen. This whole cancel recess call, this is one of the oldest chestnuts in the congressional political playbook. It's a good way to get attention online. It's a good way to get tweets, retweets, likes. You see Senator Mike Lee jumping on this as well, saying he's not going to consent to going on recess if Thune tries, which is a little bit like Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy. You actually have to go to the floor and mount a live objection to that, which he's not been willing to do so far.
Just can't declare bankruptcy?
You can't just declare, you can't just yell, I declare bankruptcy. So let's see if they're willing to do that. I remain skeptical of this. But one thing canceling recess doesn't do, it doesn't move votes. If you have business to do and you're backed up, you can use an extra week. You can use an extra 2 weeks to get those things done. But they don't have the votes for this. And what Senator Thune told our colleague Frank Thorpe on the Hill just moments ago is, show me how to get an outcome. Show me the path to getting to yes, to getting the votes to pass the Save America Act, which they don't have.
I want to ask the controller, do we have that new interview with John Thune responding? I want to toss to that right now. And Mark, I want to get your response on the other side.
Yes, because if the end game is we actually get an outcome or a result, we could stay here till Christmas. The Democrats aren't voting for this. I mean, I'm just telling you. And Republicans are not getting rid of the legislative filibuster.
Mark, what do you think Donald Trump's reaction to that's going to be?
Well, clearly we're at an impasse here. And first and foremost, as a longtime congressional staffer, whoever came up with the term recess for Congress, they should be tarred and feathered. It's district work period, it's state work period. It's a pretty pejorative term to call it recess.
Just not going home to play.
Exactly, yeah.
At least it's not vacation.
Right, totally. But clearly here, this is not about a calendar, as Leader Thune alluded to. This is about a coalition of getting votes together. So ultimately, where this needs to end up, if Republicans want to get anything done with this going forward before the election, Speaker Johnson, Leader Thune, and President Trump need to lock themselves in a room and figure out what can get 218 votes in the House, 51 in the Senate, presidential signature, and a partridge in a pear tree should it take to Christmas. But this is more about how do we find a path forward rather than some sort of calendar timeline.
Well, Taryn, one of the president's arguments that if Democrats take back the House, take back the Senate, they'll just nuke the filibuster in a heartbeat. However, today Senator John Fetterman said that he would not support terminating the filibuster. So are these just empty threats by the president?
I think they are a little bit, because I am going to say that with the threat of democracy overhead and what's been happening with Donald Trump, I think there is more support than ever for something like the filibuster as a protection for some of what's been happening and what we're seeing happen. So I do think there'll be more of a movement of there, and I think it is a little bit of an empty threat on some hyperbole, which he may be known for.
However, it is important, and I leave it to Sahil and every intrepid Capitol Hill reporter and campaign reporter, go ask Senate Democrats and candidates. Are they going to get rid of the filibuster when they have the first opportunity, or do they pledge to keep it? This is a question, that's not just a Republican dynamic. Democrats should have to answer for this directly as well.
That's an interesting question, Sahel. How do you think Democrats would respond to that right now?
Well, in 2024, the vast majority of Democrats on the ballot said they would abolish the filibuster. They tried this in January of 2022. Everyone except Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema voted to abolish the filibuster to pass their voting rights bill. What they're not going to do is do it while Donald Trump is president. They're going to need a trifecta. They're going to need a majority of senators willing to nuke the filibuster and a huge agenda, which they can go to voters and say, this is what we will pass if we end up abolishing the filibuster. This is what's standing in the way. But Fetterman flipping is also notable.
Well, I was
now they have one
ask
fewer
you,
vote.
You've been covering John Fetterman a long time, since the early days of his Senate campaign. What do you make of his unraveling relationship with the party? There's been a lot of talk about Republicans trying to get him to come over to their side. What do you make of his position on the filibuster coming out now?
Well, it's the latest issue that he's broken with the Democratic Party on. He was critical of them on immigration and the border. He's been very, very critical of Democrats in the turn on Israel. He's a hardline pro-Israel, pro-Netanyahu person, and there are fewer and fewer of them within the Democratic Party. And now today he's got an op-ed out where he admits he was wrong. He says he was wrong about the filibuster. He campaigned in favor of abolishing in 2022 when he ran. The thing is, Fetterman's term is up in 2028. He's at about 19% approval with Democrats. I can't see him winning a primary. Is he going to switch parties? Is he going to try something that Manchin and Sinema considered before they realized there was no path to getting reelected? Is he going to be around in Washington much longer is my question.
Big question. Sahel, Taryn, Mark, thank you so much for joining us here on the panel. And a programming note, tune in to NBC and NBC News Now on Wednesday for exclusive coverage of Pope Leo's Concert for Peace. Andrea Bocelli is scheduled to perform along with children from all over the world. Coverage starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. Still to come, new questions facing ICE in the wake of that fatal officer-involved shooting, in Maine. Amid allegations that the officer had a history of serious mental health issues and violent behavior and perhaps was not properly vetted. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Turning now to the next potential target of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. An administration official tells NBC News that ICE is planning to ramp up arrests and deportations of Haitian migrants, although the timing and location of those operations are still in the works. It all comes after the Supreme Court last month ruled in favor of the White House's decision to end temporary protected status, or TPS, for more than 300,000 Haitians and more than 6,000 Syrians living in the U.S. It also comes as President Trump's border czar says the administration is reviewing the vetting of an ICE officer involved in this month's deadly shooting of a Colombian native in Maine, after the Associated Press reported that the officer has a history of violent behavior and has struggled with mental health issues since he was a child.
If those are facts, I don't think he should ever cleared vetting. I know this specific case, as far as the vetting, is under review by Internal Affairs section, so we'll see where it lies. But certainly, if this person had that type of history, it would have been a vetting issue, and it should have been brought to the attention of those who make those decisions.
And joining me now is NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, what do we know at this point about that ICE officer involved in that Maine shooting?
Yeah, this really troubled history, including those mental health issues dating back for years, according to members of his own family there. There had also been some reporting over the weekend about him being found non-credible before another court, where he made some representations in the course of litigation that were not found to be true. So I think that that's really going to be such a critical issue for this investigation as it unfolds, because obviously in these sort of circumstances, when there's not really an independent outside investigation happening, those comments and the credibility of the officers is extremely important. And I think that's why you've seen some criticism of how this unfolded, and I think from a lot of critics of ICE would say that this was very foreseeable, just given when you're having a huge surge of individuals being hired on a very expedited basis like this, that there's going to be some things that slip through the cracks, or the processes are just rushed, and that people ultimately end up being part of law enforcement who never would have made it through in a normal process.
You spoke about the ICE officer. What is the status of the investigation into the shooting itself?
Yeah, that's an internal investigation, as the director said, is ongoing. But because there's not really this separate investigation, because normally, when there's an incident like this, there can be sort of two tracks. There can be that administrative track. There can also be a potentially criminal track. There's always a high bar for those criminal cases to go through, but usually there's at least some sort of investigation. And typically in the past, you've seen the Justice Department do those sort of looks at whether or not this was a use of excessive force. What are the circumstances here? That's a high bar for those cases to clear, so it's not always guaranteed that someone would be charged. In fact, it's rare for them to bring cases because you have to show that it was a use of excessive force beyond a certain means. But that track has really been sort of shut down at the Justice Department. That's not something that we're seeing them pursuing.
We just played that interview of Tom Homan. The Borders are saying if that reporting was true, that would have raised some red flags in terms of vetting with this particular officer. Are there now concerns within the Department of Homeland Security about the vetting process for ICE officers overall?
Yeah, I think that's within the broader law enforcement community. I think certainly something that they're concerned about, because you did have a lot of individuals who were hired on a very expedited basis, where there's sort of, those deeper investigations that were done into individuals, because the credibility of officers is really important. I mean, not only just for effectively carrying out the mission, right? Because you're not going to be able to effectively carry out the mission if you're not deemed credible by a judge. That's something I think in particular, some of that reporting could certainly raise questions about how that came about, as well as the violent history. Typically you have more of some more vetting behind the scenes to make sure that officers have a history than appears to have been done in this instance.
Ryan Riley, our Justice reporter, thank you so much. And thank you for watching. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There's also more ahead right now on NBC News Now. Stay with us.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.